My name's Patrick Simpson. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I don't know why it is in Alaska, but we always have to say how many generations we've lived here. I guess the more generations we've lived here, the better we are. I don't know. Of course, native Alaskans have been here, what, 10,000 years? So I don't think I'm going to catch up to them anytime quickly. But I'm a fourth generation Alaskan. I was born and raised in Cordova. And then I moved to Anchorage during my high school years, and there went on to college and graduated with a computer science degree from the University of California at San Diego. And I did all that because I get seasick. My father's a fisherman, and I grew up on fishing boats, and I realized, because I got seasick, I wouldn't be a very good fisherman. All the best fishing happens in rough, nasty weather, and unfortunately, that just wasn't going to be possible for me. So today, what I'm going to tell you about is, although I do get seasick, I still have stayed very close to the marine industry. I've actually stayed very close to fishing. And I want to tell you a little bit about a couple companies that I've had, and then I want to kind of point a little bit ahead into the future. But before I do that, I want to at least raise, what I think are some important or good questions anybody who's looking at starting a company in general and starting a company in the blue environment in particular should be asking themselves. Could we advance the slide? Thank you. First is, why would you want to start your company in Alaska? For me, it was a lifestyle question. I was born and raised here. I wanted my family to be raised here. I saw that if I could live anywhere in the world, I would want to live here. But that's not necessarily the same for everybody else. It's hard to do business in Alaska, let's be honest about that. Everything that comes in and out of Alaska comes on a ship, it comes on an airplane, and to a lesser extent comes on a truck. We don't have trains that come in and out of Alaska. So all of that means that freight's expensive, and it's a limiting factor for a lot of new ventures and businesses. So you have to think a little bit more creatively. But what we are is we're remote and we're rugged. So in terms of development of products, those can actually be attributes and not deficits. Because if you can build it and make it work here, it'll work anywhere in the world. So I looked at it with that glass of water half full perspective. And the other thing is, I wanted to stay involved with marine-based technologies and companies, and we're close to oceans, rivers, and lakes. It was the opening comments by Mr. Fleener said there's 3 million lakes in Alaska. And we've access to water. We've got access to a lot of water. We've got access to a lot of rivers. And then if you're doing product development in the blue environment, that's really nice to have. You have to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are if you're going to do a business. This is just kind of business 101, but for me personally, I was pretty strong in fisheries, born and raised a fisherman, knew the fisheries really well, had an engineering background, so I could do that part of it. I also did a lot of work in sales and marketing and product development. But where I was weak was taking a product prototype and moving it into market. And assessing that weakness is no fun. And often that assessment comes very late in your business venture. Sometimes too late for you to pivot and make a change. I think you have to know where the opportunity is. And early in the development of one of the companies, Scientific Fishery Systems, I had a business plan review done in Washington State. And one of the gentlemen there said, people will pay for pleasure and they'll pay for pain. And I thought, wow, that's kind of strange. And he then clarified that. He says, pleasure. He says, people will pay for something that makes them feel good. That's why there's Disneyland, right? But what they'll really pay for is the relief of pain. If you can find pain where nobody's relieving that pain, and that pain can take all kinds of forms, people will buy that. So look for those opportunities where there's pain. So I'll give you some examples of where I thought there was pain in some of the businesses that I started, and I'll talk about some future opportunities where maybe there's some pain right now, where there's some opportunities to be had. Then you have to ask yourself, well, who's going to pay for this? Well, I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together when I started, but I did have a pretty good business acumen. And I was sharp, so I used the Small Business Innovation Research Program. If you haven't heard of the SBIR program, I urge you to look it up. There's literally billions of dollars made available for small businesses I was very fortunate. I competed for and won several SBIR awards from the National Science Foundation, Office of Naval Research, from the Department of Commerce, from the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that funded a lot of the initial product concepts and prototypes that I mentioned earlier. I also had a company, you'll see soon, that was funded through the SBA 8A startup program and a few other things. And finally, what happens at the end? So I know that sounds strange. You're starting up your company and you're ready to go and you're ready, set, go. And why would you be thinking about the end at the beginning? But if you really don't think about the end at the beginning, it's hard for you really to know how to structure and strategize your company. And there's several ways you can end a company. I mean, you could sell out the assets. I've done that. You could sell the company outright. I haven't done that. Or you could wind the company down. It has a life. It lives that life. You make money with it, and then it winds itself down. And I've had a couple of those. Advance to the next slide, please. Will it work now? Oh, that went backwards. All right. I'll talk to you about 4 startups. I've had probably 12, 15, maybe 20 companies. I lose count. But these are 4 that were in the blue economy. First one I started was Scientific Fishery Systems in 1994. And the original focus was on a patented idea that I had the patent for called broadband sonar, which would allow me to identify fish, I thought, to species and size, and worked pretty hard to develop that technology. And then as we expanded using the SBIR program, as I mentioned earlier, we did other fisheries R&D projects. And over its 20-year life, we funded over 100 different R&D programs. Probably the hallmark, the highlight for me was we developed and built, designed, developed, built 70 sonar systems that are now counting the smolt that leave the Bristol Bay rivers. So these tiny little salmon that leave the river or the lake out the river are being counted by sonar systems that we built. So I'm proud of that kind of accomplishment. Alaska Native Technologies was an example of where we could, with a joint venture with a native tribe, utilize the SBA 8A program. So we did a lot of Navy government contract work. And then we had a large program, $18 million, 12-year program, where we developed an unmanned undersea vehicle, an underwater glider. So we did the requirements analysis and the specification and the design. And it was all under the radar. This was done on 9th Avenue. We did all our testing in Seward and out of Whittier. It's quite amazing that you can develop this kind of technology very quietly in Alaska. Nobody knows about it. And then we would go out and do some testing. Now, RV Montague was an example of where I had pain. Here was a situation where it was extremely hard for me to get on the water with a research boat. So eBay had the RV Montague up for sale. Who knew? You put state assets on eBay to sell, and I bought it, and I had that charter vessel for 3 years, and that gave me immediate access to the water. So here was an example of a startup business that actually helped me with another business, and it kind of solved my pain, which was I had a difficult time getting a vessel, especially in the summer, because in the summer is when everybody wants to work, and I couldn't get a research vessel. So I bought one, and it worked out quite well. Finally, this is another example of pain on the Kenai Peninsula as well as other places, but this company was on the Kenai Peninsula. There's a Clean Water Act that was enacted in 1980. And the Clean Water Act said that you can't dump any waste inside of 3 miles into the water. But there's a few exceptions for canneries and processing plants that will make, because the technology is not available and it's not feasible for us to do that. This was in 1980. Well, now we're in 2010, 2012, and EPA's come back and said, you know what, I don't think that's the same case anymore. So these processing plants now will have to take their waste and either run it 3 miles offshore and dump it, which would be an extreme cost, or do something else with it. So what we did was we came to those processing plants in the Kenai, in this case, and we bought their fish heads from them as a food grade item and extracted the fish oil from them and sold that as a product. And then we did that successfully for about 6 years, and then I sold the assets of that company. And they've gone on to take and add to that fish meal. So they're fully utilizing all of the waste now in the Kenai, where before it was costing processors 2 cents a pound to take their waste and dispose of it. Now they're making 5 or more cents a pound by selling it. So it was a win-win for everyone in this case. Now, in terms of looking ahead, in terms of future opportunities, I'm going to use this analogy on the second bullet of pain. But on the first one, there's just a lot of opportunity in mariculture right now. I'm involved in that myself. So one of my current ventures is that I'm helping Silver Bay Seafoods, which is a large salmon processor in Alaska, build an oyster plan where they would produce 20 million oyster a year. That's a big number, especially when you consider Alaska only produces 1.5 million oysters combined per year right now. But what a great opportunity this will be, because it'll actually reset that whole marketplace for 2 reasons. One is the size. Obviously, the size is much bigger. Second is, this is the first example where a seafood processor has come into the mariculture industry and invested. And we've been waiting for this for years and years. I mean, the oyster industry has been around for 20, 30 years. So this is really neat, and I'm involved with it. I'm excited about it. We're going through the permitting process now. There's similar stories to be said for seaweed. I'm not involved in seaweed, but I think there's opportunity there too. The second one is salmon processing automation. And if you've watched the news from time to time, what you'll see is that we have a horrible challenge trying to find workers to work in our fish processing plants. And year after year, these fish processors are spending a lot of money and time recruiting workforce. They are getting them from foreign countries. They're getting them from our universities. They're highly transient. They're spending a lot of time and money while the workforce is in place, just managing that workforce. So what I'm seeing is that's pain. All right, that's an example of pain. Automation is going to solve some of those problems. And so what I think you're going to see is an opportunity here where people are going to come in and say, you know what, we can automate portions of that workforce. Create a more skilled worker that can do 5 or 6 times what a single worker can. Pay that person possibly more money, improve retention, but at the same time alleviate some of this pain that we're seeing. So I'm projecting that. I'll throw that out there to you, but I think 10 years from now, you walk into a fish processing plant, I think it'll look very different than it does today. You may not have hundreds of workers standing on the floor processing fish. You may have tens of workers on the floor handling machines. You'll also see examples later in ocean energy, which I think is a great opportunity, but there's a presenter on that. So I think the blue economy is ripe in Alaska. Mr. Fleener made that comment. I've certainly, for the last 20, 25 years, been a participant in that economy in different ways, and I see that there's a lot of opportunity still yet to be there for the future. And I invite you all to come in and participate with that as well. So thank you for your time today.